Time now to take a look at the French papers. Belle Lupton has been going through them for us. A big story, Belle, on the papers today. It's on most of the French front pages. It's Calais and this migrant crisis.
It is. It's on most of the front pages here, most of the front pages across the channel, as you can imagine. But in France, we've essentially, just to recap, yesterday, a man of Sudanese origin was killed in the tunnel in the freight zone. And a young Egyptian who tried to go through the tunnel by climbing onto the back of one of these trains from the Gare du Nord, so this is a Eurostar train in Paris, was seriously injured. Now, according to Le Parisien, a tabloid here in France, never has the situation been so strained in Calais. Every night, it says, more than 1,500 migrants attempt that crossing by tunnel. Now, Le Parisien calls it a human tragedy and says that that is continuing. More than 37,000 people have been stopped from crossing the channel since the start of the year. A record number, says Le Parisien. Now, it reminds us why that's happening with some UN figures. Almost 60 million people, it says, were displaced around the world last year by war or by poverty. And so a lot of those people will end up trying to go into Europe and trying to go eventually into the UK. Now, which is a slightly more left-wing communist paper, calls the EU's proposal to welcome almost 55,000 asylum seekers in 2 years shameful. It talks of a new iron curtain in Europe, so you can see there the rideau de fer en Europe is this new iron curtain that it sees coming down. It denounces a lack of public debate on this, on immigration, and also a total loss of grip on reality by EU leaders who think that they can simply lock up the continent like some sort of safe, essentially.
Yeah, interesting one. Now, there has been a lot of trouble, indeed, between Britain and France over this, and a lot of papers in Britain saying that France really isn't doing enough.
Absolutely. And Le Figaro picks up on this on its front page. It says, Paris and London are helpless in the face of these Calais migrants. You can see it there. So, démunis face aux migrants de Calais. It announces that the deployment of police reinforcements on the French side is simply insufficient. It's just not going to help. It's not going to solve the problem. London, it says, like Paris, prefers to focus on the consequences of migration rather than dealing straight with the causes. So rather than going to the countries where these migrants are coming and trying to stop the flow right there at the beginning, it just thinks, OK, let's try and deal with them now that they've arrived at our shores, which is just too late. So the quote from Le Figaro is, if David Cameron wants to stem the flow of migrants, he can. All he'd need to do is announce that from now on, an ID card is necessary to work in the UK and that there'll be a crackdown on illegal work. Now, obviously, the British Prime Minister's far from doing that. ID cards were one of those things that he campaigned vigorously against. Now, in pro-business paper L'Opinion, this latest migrant crisis owes a lot to Europe's disunity as it wavers, hesitates, it lets countries blame each other. So it talks about France blaming Italy, Italy blaming France, France and the UK blaming each other. Proof, says L'Opinion, that the problem becomes impossible to manage once migrants arrive in the continent. Until then, it's possibly, easier to manage. But once they're here, there's just no chance. So European countries, says L'Opinion, must organise themselves, listen to each other and stem the flow.
Yeah, it definitely does seem to have some peculiar rules, if you like, in Europe, according to asylum seekers and migrants in general. There's another story, though, that's making waves in the French papers. It's a group of Cambodian farmers who have brought a case before the French justice system.
So this is a group of indigenous farmers who've brought a human rights case to the French justice against a French multinational, which is called the Bolloré Group. Now, according to Le Monde's website, it's about a concession that was granted in 2008 by the Cambodian government. Now, that allowed the Cambodian branch of this French corporation to develop almost 7,000 hectares worth of rubber tree plantations in Cambodia. Now, the Bunong people, that's the name of this particular indigenous group, tried in vain to fight for their rights. They've been doing that for 7 years, and it's only now, 7 years later, that they're demanding the return of their original lands and also several million euros worth in damages. Now, their story, says Le Monde, is one of real economic, social, environmental and religious catastrophe, all down, it says, to the Bolloré group, which denied them their resources and representation and destroyed their livelihoods. Now, the group, which is owned by Vincent Bolloré, who is sort of France's answer to Richard Branson, is accused of massive deforestation, displacement of local populations and the destruction of cultural sites without adequate compensation. Now, it's not the first time that this company's done this sort of thing. Le Monde reminds us that back in 2010, the OECD was petitioned by 4 NGOs to look into similar sorts of accusations from the subsidiary of this group in Cameroon.
OK, well, it's one we're definitely going to have to keep our eye on for you all here at France 24. Finally, I didn't bring it with me to the studio, but there was at least one French paper that had a different front cover. It ran with a Frenchman running for the presidency of FIFA.
Absolutely, and that is Libération. So on its front page, it has the former number 10 of the French football team, who announced yesterday his candidacy for the head of FIFA. His golden goal, says Libération, which says that he is the big favourite for the job. But Libération says the job isn't necessarily made for him, though. The paper wishes him good luck, but says kind of wryly that the institution is now, or the institution he wants to run, is now more morally destitute than the Italian mafia. Le Monde calls it Platini the tactician. That's what they call him. They say he wants to take the baton from what they call his best enemy, so playing best friend, worst enemy, Sepp Blatter, to whom Platini apparently owes, in part, the launch of his own career in world football.
One wonders who would want the job, but we'll have to leave it at that for now. Belle Upton, thanks indeed for that review of the French papers. That brings us to the end of this edition. Do take care.